The cobblestones of Old City shimmered under a relentless Philadelphia rain, each slick surface reflecting the glow of a distant street lamp. Carmen Lewis hunched deeper into her coat, the chill seeping into her bones, but her focus was unwavering. Her wired mic, a tiny lifeline to the truth, was tucked discreetly beneath the table of the outdoor cafe, capturing every hushed word from her source. This was it. The story. The one that would finally expose the deep roots of corruption Patrick Sullivan had planted in this city. A sudden, deafening crack ripped through the quiet night. Not a gunshot, not exactly, but something close. A sharp, metallic impact, followed by a sickening thud. Carmen's head snapped up. Across the street near a historic brick building, a figure crumpled to the ground. Then shouts, a scramble of bodies. Chaos erupted, quick and brutal, like a storm hitting without warning. Her heart launched itself into her throat, a frantic drum against her ribs. Instinct took over. Journalistic ethics screamed at her to record, to document, but survival screamed louder. She didn't hesitate. Her hand flew to her bag, shoving the mic inside, a jumble of wires and plastic. Her source, wide-eyed and terrified, was already gone, melting into the rain-streaked shadows. Carmen didn't blame them. She pushed back her chair with a screech that went unnoticed in the rising pandemonium and sprinted. Her eyes locked onto the beacon of a yellow cab, idling at the corner, its brake lights a hazy blur through the downpour. "Drive!" she gasped, yanking open the back door, her breath ragged. "Please, just drive!" She practically flung herself inside, the sudden warmth of the interior a brief, deceptive comfort. But before she could even slam the door shut, a heavy hand gripped the frame, stopping her cold. A shadow loomed in the opening, impossibly tall, impossibly broad. Patrick Sullivan. The man she'd spent months investigating, the Philly Don, whose name whispered through Union halls and back alleys, was suddenly there, right beside her. He slid into the seat, his presence filling the small space, a dangerous heat against her side. The air crackled with an unspoken threat. His eyes, dark and unreadable, fixed on hers, holding her captive. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement that spoke of absolute control, he reached across her, his arm brushing her chest, and clicked the door lock down. Thunk, a final chilling sound. Carmen's blood ran cold. Terror, sharp and visceral, clawed at her throat, but defiance flared, hot and angry. She twisted to face him, her voice a shaky whisper. "What do you want?" His gaze remained steady, unnervingly calm in the aftermath of the street's violence. "You're safer with me, Ms. Lewis." His voice was a low rumble, a dangerous promise. "For now." Outside, the rain-dappled taxi glass blurred the frantic world, turning the chaos into an abstract painting. Inside, Carmen felt trapped, utterly and terrifyingly alone with the very man who held her city in his grip. Her fingers instinctively tightened around the strap of her bag, where her hidden mic lay, a useless weapon against a force like him. She was a witness. She was his captive, and she had no idea what came next. The cab lurched forward, throwing Carmen against the worn leather seat. She barely registered the impersonal yellow interior, only the suffocating proximity of Patrick Sullivan. The cabbie, a man with a blank face and a cap pulled low, drove with unsettling speed, navigating the rain-slicked streets of South Philly. Row homes, usually a comforting sight, blurred into a threatening tunnel, each passing window a brief, distorted reflection of her own terrified face. Carmen's heart still hammered, a frantic echo of the chaos she'd just witnessed, but a cold dread was replacing the raw terror. She wasn't safe. She was with him. Patrick leaned back, his gaze still on her, an unnerving stillness to him that made her skin crawl. "That was messy," he rumbled, his voice cutting through the hum of the engine, casual as if discussing the weather. "Not how things are usually handled." Carmen bristled, a flicker of outrage pushing past her fear. "Messy? A man was just hit, probably killed, and he called it messy. What happened back there? She demanded, her voice steadier than she felt, though a tremor still betrayed her. Who was that? He sighed, a faint ripple of annoyance crossing his otherwise impassive features. Doesn't matter who. What matters is where. Too close to a school. There are rules, Miss Lewis. Rules. He spoke of rules as if he were a moral authority, not the subject of her investigation, the very man who embodied the lawless underbelly of the city. His casual mention of a code was both horrifying and strangely, unsettlingly, almost a reassurance. And you were a witness. An inconvenient one, I'm afraid. His words sent a fresh jolt of fear through her veins. I'm offering you protection. It sounded less like an offer and more like an order, like a cage. Carmen scoffed, a raw, defiant sound that surprised even herself. Protection or captivity? She met his gaze, refusing to back down, her journalistic ethics warring with her primal survival instinct. I'm a reporter, Mr. Sullivan. I don't need protection. I need answers. And my source needs protection. She clutched her bag tighter, her knuckles white against the worn fabric. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of frantic thoughts. Record. He's talking. This is the story. This is the most dangerous interview of your life. Her fingers fumbled inside the bag, finding the wired mic. It was small, easy to conceal. She slid it out, palming it, then subtly placed it on the seat cushion between them, angled towards him, her thumb hovering near the tiny record button. She prayed he wouldn't notice, but she had to try. This was her only weapon. A faint, almost imperceptible curve touched the corner of Patrick's lips. He knew. He always knew. Her heart leaped into her throat. You're Carmen Lewis, the podcaster. Philly's underbelly, isn't it? His voice was laced with a chilling amusement, a dangerous purr that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. Investigating my union roots. You're good, Miss Lewis. Very good. Her blood ran cold. He had been watching her all this time. The mic, now fully exposed to his discerning gaze, felt like a toy, useless, pathetic. So you know what I do, she shot back, trying desperately to regain some control, some semblance of her authority. And I'm going to tell this story, the real story. And you will, Patrick said, his eyes darkening, the amusement gone, replaced by something hard and unyielding. Eventually, but not until I say so, not until I sort out this mess. He gestured vaguely at the rain-streaked window, as if the entire city's corrupt underbelly was merely a minor inconvenience. There are bigger players here than you realize, Miss Lewis. People who don't care about rules or codes. They'd silence you permanently, and your source with you. He paused, letting the threat hang heavy in the air, a cold, undeniable truth. My intention is simple: keep you quiet, keep you safe, until I can clean up this particular corner of the city. He glanced down, his gaze lingering for a fraction of a second on the mic, then back to her eyes, pinning her in place. Consider yourself under my care. Carmen swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. The cab continued its relentless journey, pulling her deeper into Patrick Sullivan's world, a world she'd only ever observed from a safe, journalistic distance. The rain outside seemed to intensify, mirroring the storm raging inside her. She was trapped. A pawn in a dangerous game she didn't fully understand, with a man who was both her captor and, impossibly, claiming to be her protector. The mic, still recording, felt heavy and precarious. She was on dangerous ground, and the only way out was through him. The cab stopped as abruptly as it had started, jarring Carmen forward. She hadn't even realized they'd left the city's familiar grid, the ride a blur of rain and terrifying silence. The door beside her opened, not by Patrick, but by a silent, burly man who stood aside, his gaze impassive. "Out, Miss Lewis," Patrick said, his voice low, a command she couldn't ignore. She stepped onto a paved driveway, the rain having finally ceased, leaving the air damp and heavy. Before her stood a sprawling stone house, framed by manicured hedges and tall, imposing gates. It looked like something out of a magazine, expensive, pristine, and utterly isolated. A gilded cage, she thought, the words a bitter taste in her mouth. Inside, the luxury was undeniable. Polished wood floors, plush carpets, tasteful art on the walls. No bars, no obvious locks, but every window offered a view of thick woods, and every door seemed to lead deeper into the house or out into the vast, empty property. Her bag, still clutched in her hand, felt suddenly heavy, a useless weight. Her phone was gone, she realized, a cold wave of panic washing over her. She checked her pockets instinctively. Nothing. "Where are we?" she demanded, turning to Patrick, who had followed her in, shedding his jacket to reveal a tailored suit that somehow made him look even more formidable. "A place where you'll be safe," he replied, already moving towards a grand, sweeping staircase. "And where you can't be found. Your room is upstairs. Get settled." Carmen's defiance flared. "My room? This isn't a hotel, Mr. Sullivan. This is kidnapping." He stopped, turning slowly to face her, a dark intensity in his eyes. "It's protection, Miss Lewis, and you're not going anywhere." His words were calm, utterly devoid of threat, yet they chilled her more than any shout could have. "You'll have everything you need. Food, clothes, a library if you wish. But the gates are locked, and there are men. Always." Later, after a silent dinner delivered by one of Patrick's men, Carmen tried to test the boundaries. She walked the perimeter of her opulent bedroom, checking the sturdy windows, the heavy, unyielding door. Locked. Not with a key, but with a silent, unseen mechanism. She tried the main entrance downstairs. The door was solid, the lock unseen but undoubtedly powerful. The silence of the house pressed in on her, broken only by the faint hum of the heating system. She felt like a specimen under glass, observed, contained, but her mic. She still had her mic. It was tucked deep into her bag, forgotten for now, but a tiny spark of hope in the vast darkness of her confinement. She was sitting by the unlit fireplace, staring into the flickering embers of her anger, when Patrick entered without knocking. He carried a book in his hand, a worn copy of a classic novel she'd mentioned in a passing comment during one of her podcasts about the city's history. Her stomach twisted. He didn't just know her work. He knew her. "Having trouble sleeping, Miss Lewis?" he asked, his voice softer than she'd expected, yet still commanding. He held out the book. "I thought you might appreciate this. You spoke of it once." Carmen stared at the book, then at him. The gesture was unsettling. A captor providing comfort. It was a calculated move, she knew, designed to disarm her. "You think a book will make me forget I'm a prisoner?" she shot back, her voice sharp, cutting through the quiet. "You think I'll be grateful?" He sat in a heavy armchair opposite her, not reacting to her anger. "I think you're smart enough to understand the gravity of your situation and what you witnessed. The people involved aren't like me, Miss Lewis. They don't have a code. They don't leave witnesses alive, especially not tenacious podcasters with a penchant for exposing truths." "And you do?" she scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her. "You have a code? You're a crime boss, Mr. Sullivan. You run this city's underbelly." "I maintain a balance," he corrected, his eyes holding hers, unwavering. "A necessary order. What happened tonight was a disruption, a rogue element, and it put you, an innocent, in harm's way." He paused, a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher in his gaze. "My terms are simple. You stay here. You don't try to leave. You don't try to contact anyone. In return, I guarantee your safety. And the safety of your source when I find them." Her heart leaped. "My source, you know where they are?" "Not yet," he admitted, a frustratingly honest answer. "But I have my people looking. It's in my interest to find them. They were part of this mess that broke my code." He leaned forward, his voice dropping, becoming a low, intimate rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. "You want to expose the truth, Miss Lewis? You want to bring down the real criminals? You'll need my help, and for now you'll play by my rules." Carmen felt a strange mix of fear, fury, and a terrifying, reluctant curiosity. He was dangerous, manipulative, and utterly in control. Yet he spoke of a code, of protecting her source, of a deeper, more complex game. Her journalistic instincts screamed. This was the story, yes, but it was also her life. And she was trapped, alone with the devil himself, forced to listen to his terms in a luxurious cage she couldn't escape. The book lay untouched on the table, a symbol of his unsettling blend of control and unexpected consideration. She hated him, and a tiny, unbidden part of her, the reporter, was utterly captivated. Days bled into a strange, unsettling rhythm in Patrick Sullivan's luxurious cage. Carmen, the investigative reporter, found herself in a constant state of alert, her senses sharpened by the forced proximity to danger. She watched him, always. When he took calls, his voice a low, gravelly murmur. When he paced the grand living room, his presence filling the space. She picked up on fragments, half-heard commands to his men, subtle inflections in his tone. He was a puzzle she couldn't stop trying to solve, a dark, dangerous enigma. One afternoon, a sharp, urgent conversation drifted from his study. Carmen, pretending to read in the adjacent library, strained to listen. "No," Patrick's voice, usually calm, was clipped, final. "Absolutely not, you understand? I don't care what he offered. That property backs right up to St. Michael's. My code is clear. We don't touch anything that jeopardizes the kids. Find another way." A beat of silence. "And tell Tony to back off Mrs. Rossi's son. He's a snitch, yes, but he's our snitch. Anyone touches him, they answer to me. Whistleblowers, even little ones, get protected." Carmen's breath caught. St. Michael's, a Catholic school in South Philly she knew well. And whistleblowers, her own source, the one she'd been so desperately trying to protect, echoed in her mind. He actually had a code, a tangible, rigid boundary that even his brutal world couldn't cross. It was horrifying, this glimpse into his twisted morality, yet it was also undeniably compelling. It was a dark kind of integrity, and she found herself against all reason respecting it. A shiver, not entirely of fear, traced its way down her spine. Their conversations, when they happened, were charged. He'd sometimes join her in the library, watching her read, or they'd share a meal in silence, the air thick with unspoken words. He was always observing her, a predator's intensity in his gaze. But she was watching him too. She'd snap at him, challenge his methods, his authority, and he'd meet her fire with an unnerving calm that only fueled her frustration and a strange, unfamiliar spark. She'd find herself analyzing his gestures, the way his dark eyes held hers, the surprising softness in his voice when he spoke of the city's history, a city he claimed to protect in his own brutal way. There was a raw, undeniable power to him, a dangerous charisma that pulled at something deep within her, a reluctant attraction she fought with every fiber of her being. She hated that she found him fascinating. She hated that he could make her feel a flicker of something other than fear. The unsettling quiet of her forced confinement was broken by a growing, gnawing dread. Her source. She hadn't been able to contact them since that terrifying night. Every day, the silence grew heavier. One morning, the fear became unbearable. "Where is my source?" she demanded, cornering Patrick in the living room, her voice tight with barely contained panic. "I need to know. Have you found them?" He looked up from the newspaper he was reading, his expression unreadable. "My men haven't located them yet." "Don't lie to me," Carmen shot back, her voice rising. "You said you'd protect them. Did you have them taken? Are you holding them too?" Accusations spilled from her, fueled by fear and suspicion. He was a mafia boss. This was his world. Of course, he would use her source or silence them. Patrick slowly folded the newspaper, his movements deliberate, his eyes hardening. "I told you, Ms. Lewis, my code applies. I don't harm whistleblowers, and I don't lie. Not about things that matter." He stood, closing the distance between them, his presence overwhelming. "Your source disappeared because they were caught between bigger players. The hit you witnessed, that wasn't about me. That was a rogue enforcer, someone who operates outside the established order, backed by a powerful developer who wants to push through a project that would hurt a lot of good people. Your source had intel on them." Carmen stared, her accusations momentarily forgotten, replaced by a fresh wave of shock. A rogue enforcer, a developer. This wasn't just about Patrick Sullivan anymore. This was a wider, more dangerous game, and her source was caught right in the middle of it. "Who?" she whispered, her journalistic instincts roaring back to life, overshadowing even her fear of him. "Who is this developer?" Patrick's lips pressed into a thin line, his gaze intense. "That, Ms. Lewis, is what we need to find out. And now, thanks to this rogue element, you're involved too." He paused, a strange glint in his eyes. "Perhaps now we have common ground." Carmen stared at Patrick, the words "common ground" echoing in the luxurious silence of the room. A rogue enforcer, a powerful developer, her source. It was a dizzying, terrifying cascade of information that shifted everything she thought she knew. Her journalist's brain, despite the fear, ignited. This wasn't just his story, or even her story about him. This was a whole new level of corruption, one that threatened the very fabric of the city she loved. "Common ground," she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. "You want me to believe you're suddenly on the side of truth and justice?" The sarcasm was a shield, but a weak one. Inside, a desperate hope warred with her deep-seated suspicion. Patrick moved closer, his gaze intense, capturing hers. "I want to maintain order, Ms. Lewis. This developer, their enforcer, they're destabilizing the city. They're violating rules, codes that keep things from spiraling into absolute chaos. They don't just want money, they want control, without any regard for the consequences. Your source had information that could stop them." He paused, a flicker of something almost like grudging respect in his eyes. "My methods, as you well know, are direct, but they would cause more chaos, more bloodshed. They would also put your source at even greater risk. You, however, have a different kind of weapon." He gestured vaguely. "Your podcast, your ability to expose truth, to make people listen, to make things legitimate. That's something my world can't do. I can silence an enemy, but you, Ms. Lewis, you can expose them to the light, where they can't hide anymore, without a single bullet fired." Carmen felt a sickening lurch in her stomach. He was asking her to ally with him, the very man she was investigating, the kingpin of Philadelphia's underworld, wanted her help. Her journalistic integrity screamed in protest. Every ethical bone in her body recoiled. How could she, a reporter dedicated to exposing corruption, work hand in hand with a criminal? It felt like a betrayal of everything she stood for. But then the other voice, the one that whispered of her missing source, grew louder. Her source was out there, in danger, because of this rogue enforcer and developer. Patrick was offering a way to find them, to save them, to bring down a threat that, by his own admission, was worse than himself. Was her moral purity worth her source's life, worth allowing this new, unprincipled evil to fester in the city? The truth versus safety theme wasn't abstract anymore. It was a brutal, immediate choice. She thought of the cobblestones, the rain, the fear in her source's eyes just before the hit. She thought of the code Patrick spoke of, the one that protected schools and whistleblowers. It was twisted, yes, but it was something. This new enemy, as Patrick described them, had no such code. They were pure, unadulterated greed. Carmen took a deep breath, pushing down the fear, the revulsion, the sheer absurdity of the situation. Her commitment to her source and to the city outweighed her personal distaste for Patrick Sullivan. She would use him, just as he intended to use her. "All right," she said, her voice firm, surprising even herself with its strength. Her gaze met his, unwavering. "I'll consider it, but on my terms, Mr. Sullivan, not yours." Patrick raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "And what are your terms, Ms. Lewis?" "No violence," she stated, her words sharp, leaving no room for misinterpretation. "From me, or from your men, if I'm involved. My purpose is to expose, not to incite a war, and my story—" She leaned forward, her eyes blazing with fierce determination. "When it's published, when this is all over, will be my story, unfiltered, uncensored. I will report the truth, the whole truth about everything, including you. No compromises on my integrity." Patrick's smile vanished, his expression becoming unreadable. He studied her for a long moment, a silent battle raging between them. He was a man of power, used to dictating terms, not receiving them, but he also needed her. He needed her unique weapon. Finally, he nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "Agreed," he said, his voice low, almost a concession. "No violence, Ms. Lewis, not from you, and your story, when the time comes, will be your own." He held out a hand, a gesture of alliance. "Do we have a deal?" Carmen stared at his outstretched hand, then back into his dangerous, compelling eyes. This was it. The line she was about to cross. The alliance she never imagined. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. Then slowly she raised her hand and met his, her grip surprisingly firm. The touch was electric, a jolt of unexpected heat that sizzled between them, sealing a pact forged in danger and desperation. She was now bound to the devil, an unwilling participant in his world, but with her own rules. Her heart hammered, a mix of terror and exhilarating purpose. This was the most dangerous story of her life, and she had just thrown herself headfirst into the very heart of it. The fragile truce Carmen had forged with Patrick Sullivan shattered the moment his face tightened, his eyes darkening as he ended a phone call. He stood by the window of the opulent safe house, the vast, manicured grounds doing little to calm the sudden, palpable tension in the air. Carmen, who had been trying to piece together her notes in the library, felt a cold dread seep into her bones. He turned, his gaze locking onto hers, grim and unyielding. "They know," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the silence. "The developer. He knows you're alive, and he knows you're looking for your source." Carmen's breath caught. "They know." The words were a physical blow, confirming her worst fears. Her source, already missing, was now directly targeted, and so was she. "How?" she demanded, her voice sharp with fear and fury. "How could they possibly know?" Patrick ran a hand through his dark hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "Doesn't matter now. What matters is they're actively looking for you, for both of you, and they're not subtle." He paused, his jaw tight. "That hit you witnessed? It was a message. Not just for my people, but for anyone who might talk. They were sending a warning, and now they know their warning was incomplete." A chill snaked up Carmen's spine. The hit hadn't just been a random act of violence. It had been a calculated move, and she had blundered right into its aftermath. The rogue enforcer, the developer. These weren't just names anymore. They were a direct, immediate threat. "We move," Patrick stated, already heading towards the door. "Now, this place is compromised." Carmen didn't argue. The gilded cage had become a trap, its luxury now a suffocating illusion. She grabbed her bag, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was no longer just a captive, she was a target. And suddenly, being with Patrick, as terrifying as it was, felt like the only option. They moved fast, a blur of silent men and hushed commands. The journey was tense, the cabbie from before, still impassive, driving them through the city's labyrinthine streets. This time, there was no aimless wandering. They headed deep into South Philly, the familiar grid of row homes, a stark contrast to the secluded grandeur of the safe house. The new location was smaller, older, a narrow, red-brick row home nestled between two others, its paint peeling slightly, its windows dark. It looked utterly unremarkable, blending seamlessly into the neighborhood. It felt less like a sanctuary and more like a hiding place, exposed and vulnerable, yet ironically safer in its anonymity. Carmen stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of old wood and something faintly metallic. Patrick surveyed the small living room, his gaze sweeping over the worn furniture, the slightly crooked picture frames. He pulled a small silver chain from beneath his shirt, a Saint medal resting in his palm, his thumb brushed over the tarnished metal, a brief, private moment of reflection in the harsh light of their reality. Carmen watched him, a flicker of something she couldn't name, reverence, fear, crossing his face before he tucked it away. It was a silent prayer, she realized, a plea for protection in a world where he was both the protector and the danger. Her source. The thought hit her with renewed force, stripping away the last vestiges of her fear for her own safety. The developer knew, which meant her source was in even greater peril. The fear she felt for herself solidified into a fierce, unwavering resolve for them. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was about action. She met Patrick's eyes, her own burning with a fresh determination. "We can't just hide," she said, her voice steady, confident. "They're actively hunting for my source. We have to find them first, and we have to expose this developer." Her terms from before, the non-violence, the truth, they still held. But now she was no longer merely agreeing, she was driving. "Tell me everything you know about this enforcer and the developer, every detail." Patrick looked at her, a flicker of surprise, then something akin to approval in his dark eyes. He saw the change in her, the shift from terrified witness to relentless journalist. He nodded slowly. "Good," he said, his voice low. "Now we talk. And then, Miss Lewis, we work." Carmen felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp. The game had changed. She was no longer just a reporter caught in the crossfire. She was an active participant, an unlikely ally to a mafia boss driven by a singular, urgent purpose. Her source, the truth, and the city. She would get them all, and she would do it on her terms. The small row home, once a symbol of their precarious hiding, now felt like a war room. Carmen sat across from Patrick at a worn kitchen table, a chipped mug of lukewarm coffee between her hands. The rain had stopped, but the air remained heavy, mirroring the tension that crackled between them. Her earlier fear had solidified into a cold, sharp resolve. She was no longer just a target. She was a hunter. "All right, Sullivan," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Tell me everything. Who is this developer? What's the project? And what exactly did my source have that could expose them?" Patrick leaned back, his powerful frame seeming to dwarf the small kitchen. His eyes, dark and piercing, held hers. "The developer is Elias Thorne. He's been quietly buying up swathes of property along the riverfront, pushing for a massive commercial development. Hotels, luxury condos, pushing out local businesses, working-class families. It's all about profit, no regard for the neighborhood, for the people who've called this city home for generations." Carmen's jaw tightened. Thorne. She'd heard whispers, but nothing concrete enough for a podcast. He was notorious for being untouchable, cloaked in layers of shell corporations and political influence. "And the enforcer?" "Marco Rossi," Patrick continued, his voice laced with a dangerous edge. "Thorne's muscle. He's been persuading property owners to sell, using tactics that cross every line. The hit you saw wasn't just a warning. It was Rossi making a statement. He's reckless. And your source, Patrick paused, his gaze intensifying. Your source had documentation of Rossi's strong-arm tactics, linking him directly to Thorne, and more importantly, detailing how Thorne was laundering money through these property acquisitions, information that would blow Thorne's entire project out of the water. A cold knot formed in Carmen's stomach. Money laundering, forced sales. This wasn't just a local dispute, it was a sprawling web of organized crime far deeper than she'd imagined, and her source was at the heart of it. "Why can't you expose him?" she challenged, knowing the answer but needing to hear it. Patrick's lips thinned. "My methods, Miss Lewis, would involve direct action. It would be messy, more violence. It would give Thorne exactly what he wants, an excuse to play the victim, to rally public sympathy against the mafia. And it wouldn't bring down his entire empire. It would just create more chaos. And it would put your source, and everyone else who might speak out, in even greater danger." He met her gaze, his expression uncharacteristically frank. "My world thrives in the shadows. Thorne understands that. But you—" He gestured towards her, a flicker of something like respect in his eyes. "You bring light, you legitimize, you force the truth into the public square. That's a weapon I don't possess." Carmen felt a strange mix of dread and exhilaration. He was right. Her podcast, her voice, her ability to broadcast facts, that was her power. It was the only thing that could truly unravel Thorne without resorting to more bloodshed. This was why he needed her. This was their common ground. "So what's the plan?" she asked, leaning forward, all journalistic instincts now fully engaged. "We need irrefutable evidence, something that can't be spun, can't be denied." "A clean story," Patrick nodded slowly, a grudging acceptance in his eyes. "My men have intel, locations where Thorne and Rossi meet, potential safe houses, contacts. But it's fragmented. We need to connect the dots. You tell me what kind of evidence you need to make your clean story." "I'll tell you how we can get it." Carmen pulled a small notebook and pen from her bag, her fingers flying across the page. "Financial records, bank statements, shell company registrations. Audio, if possible, of Thorne or Rossi discussing their illegal activities. Witness testimony, though I know that's dangerous. Anything that directly links the money laundering and intimidation tactics to Thorne." She paused, then held up her wired mic. "This is our greatest asset. It's not just about capturing sound, Sullivan. It's about capturing the moment, the raw, undeniable confession. It's about public pressure. It's about making it impossible for them to deny." Patrick looked at the small mic, a flicker of understanding dawning in his eyes. "You want to record them?" "Not just record them," Carmen clarified, her voice firm. "Broadcast them. Live, if necessary. When you put someone's confession on the air in real time, it's not just a recorded conversation. It's a public trial. There's no editing, no spinning. It forces their hand. It creates accountability." She explained, her passion for her craft shining through. "But it has to be ethical, no entrapment, just putting them in a situation where they reveal themselves." He considered her words, his gaze intense. She saw the wheels turning in his mind, the shift from his world of force to her world of truth. "Live broadcast," he murmured, almost to himself. "That's a different kind of hit, a precise one." He looked up, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "All right, Ms. Lewis. Your rules, my resources. Let's expose Thorne." Carmen met his gaze, a jolt of something electric passing between them. They were two disparate forces bound by a dangerous necessity. She knew this alliance was a pact with the devil, but for her source, for the city, she would walk through fire. And with Patrick Sullivan, she was pretty sure she was about to do just that. The air in the row room was thick with the scent of stale coffee and unspoken tension. Carmen and Patrick, had spent hours poring over maps of the riverfront, whispering names, sketching out a plan. Their target, a mid-level city inspector rumoured to be on Thorne's payroll, someone who could confirm the illegal permits for Rossi's demolition crews. It was a delicate operation, requiring finesse, not force. Carmen felt a strange mix of adrenaline and unease as they drove through the pre-dawn streets. The cabbie, the same silent man who had driven her into this nightmare, was at the wheel. Patrick sat beside her, a dark, watchful presence. Her wired mic was ready, tucked into her sleeve. This was it, their first real test. They found the inspector's house in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. It was still dark, a single porch light casting a weak glow. The plan was simple. Carmen, posing as a desperate constituent, would try to get him to talk, while Patrick remained hidden, a silent, menacing backup. But when Carmen approached the door, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach, she found it ajar, a single, ominous detail. She pushed it open slowly. The house was empty, not just empty, but ransacked. Drawers pulled out, papers strewn across the floor, a broken lamp lying on its side. No inspector. No sign of a struggle. Just a chilling emptiness. Someone had been here, and they had been thorough. Carmen's blood ran cold. She backed away slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. She met Patrick's eyes as he emerged from the shadows, his face grim. "He's gone," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. They got to him first. A wave of frustration, hot and bitter, washed over her. "How?" she demanded, spinning to face Patrick, her voice sharp with accusation. "How could they know? We were careful. We planned this for hours." It felt like a direct punch to her journalistic gut. Her meticulous planning, her ethical approach, all for nothing. Patrick's jaw clenched. "My methods are direct, Ms. Lewis. They are also effective. Your clean approach is too slow, too visible. This isn't a podcast interview, this is a war." His voice was low, laced with an unnerving calm that only infuriated her more. "You think Thorne's men wait for a polite knock on the door? They move fast, faster than you're used to. And your fast methods led us straight into an empty house." She shot back, her temper flaring. "This is your world, Sullivan. You should know how to navigate it." She felt a desperate need to prove him wrong, to prove that her way, the honest way, could work. She couldn't stand being dependent on him, on his violence-tinged protection. "Perhaps I need to remind you, Ms. Lewis, that I agreed to your rules," he countered, his eyes narrowing. "No violence, no compromising your integrity. This is the consequence of that." The words stung, a bitter truth she couldn't deny. But she wouldn't back down. Not now. Not ever. She needed to do something, anything, to break free of this suffocating dependence. Later that day, back in the row room, the tension between them was palpable. Carmen couldn't shake the feeling of being stifled, of her hands being tied by Patrick's world. She knew a side door, rarely guarded. She knew the city better than he gave her credit for. There was a low-level contact, a former City Hall clerk named Maria, who used to feed her tips about Thorne's early dealings. Maria was probably scared, but Carmen knew her, knew how to approach her. Alone. She waited until Patrick was on a call in the small, cramped office, his voice a low rumble. Slipping out the side door, she moved quickly, melting into the bustling South Philly streets. She hailed a cab, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilarating defiance. She would get her own evidence. She would prove him wrong. Maria's apartment was in a rundown building near Passyunk Avenue. Carmen knocked, her wired mic discreetly activated in her pocket, ready to record. No answer. She tried again, louder. The door creaked open, just a sliver. Maria's eyes, wide with terror, peered out. "Carmen, you shouldn't be here," Maria whispered, her voice trembling. "They know about you. They know about me. You have to go. Now!" Before Carmen could even respond, a shadow detached itself from the alleyway across the street. a tall, bulky figure moving with a predatory grace. Marco Rossi. Her blood ran cold. He was here. He knew. Carmen froze, her mind screaming. She was exposed, alone, a single vulnerable target. Rossi's eyes, cold and menacing, fixed on her. He started to cross the street, his pace slow, deliberate, like a hunter closing in on prey. Maria slammed her door shut, the sound echoing Carmen's despair. Suddenly a hand clamped down on Carmen's arm, pulling her back hard into the mouth of a narrow passage between two buildings. Patrick. He materialized from nowhere, his presence a sudden, terrifying comfort. He pushed her against the damp brick, his body shielding hers, just as Rossi reached the spot where she'd been standing, his gaze sweeping the street. Carmen could feel Patrick's breath on her hair, the solid warmth of his body against her back, the rough fabric of his suit jacket scraped her cheek. Rossi's heavy footsteps passed, just inches away from their hiding spot. She held her breath, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. This was it. This was the real danger. This was his world, and she had almost walked right into it, alone. Rossi's footsteps faded. Patrick slowly eased his grip, turning her to face him. His eyes were dark, blazing with a mixture of fury and something else, something she couldn't quite decipher. "Naive, Miss Lewis," he whispered, his voice dangerously low, a stark contrast to the pounding of her heart. "Or just reckless." She couldn't speak. The terror was still too raw, too real. She had almost been caught. Her independent streak, her need to prove herself, had nearly cost her everything. He didn't wait for an answer. His gaze swept the street, then fixed on her again. "They knew," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, but with a chilling undertone. "They knew you would come here. They knew you would try to make contact. Someone is leaking our movements, Miss Lewis. Someone is watching us, and they're not on our side." The words hung in the air, a new, terrifying revelation. Not just Thorne, not just Rossi, but someone closer, a betrayer. Carmen felt a fresh wave of dread, cold and sharp. She had almost died, and it wasn't just because of her own recklessness. There was an unseen player, a shadow in their alliance. And suddenly, the thought of facing that shadow, of facing any of this without Patrick at her side, was utterly unthinkable. The fragile truce had been reforged in fire, and she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she needed him. The narrow row home, once a cramped hiding spot, now pulsed with a new kind of energy. Carmen Lewis, still raw from her close call with Rossi, felt her terror solidify into a cold, relentless drive. Patrick Sullivan's world was dangerous, yes, but it also had resources, and she was going to use every single one of them. She commandeered the small, cluttered kitchen table, spreading out crude maps of Thorne's development sites, printouts of Shell Company filings Patrick's men had somehow procured, and notes scribbled furiously in her own reporter's shorthand. Patrick, for his part, kept his word. He gave her access to his network, not directly, but through intermediaries. A quiet man named Sal delivered encrypted tablets and burner phones, explaining how to use their secure lines. Another, a surprisingly tech-savvy woman named Lena, showed her how to cross-reference public records with the hushed intel flowing in from Patrick's street-level informants. Carmen dove in, her journalistic instincts roaring back to life. Every piece of information became a thread in a tangled web. She grilled Sal about the timeline of their movements, the precise moments they'd left the safe house, the routes they'd taken to the inspector's apartment, to Maria's. She cross-referenced Lena's reports of shadowy data brokers selling information in dark corners of the internet. This wasn't about back alleys and anonymous meetups for Carmen herself, not yet. This was about piecing together the digital breadcrumbs, the whispers from the concrete jungle that Patrick's network could hear, but she could analyze. The constant threat, the knowledge that Thorne's enforcer Rossi was actively hunting them, kept her tethered to Patrick. She hated the feeling, the suffocating dependence, but she couldn't deny its necessity. He moved through the row home like a silent sentinel, always there, always watching. He didn't interfere with her investigation, but his presence was a constant reminder of the stakes. She'd find herself asking him questions, needing his street knowledge to decipher a cryptic report from an informant, or his understanding of local politics to explain a sudden permit approval. It chafed, but she relied on him, more than she wanted to admit. Her mind kept circling back to the two failed attempts: the ransacked inspector's house, her near capture at Maria's. What was the common denominator? Someone had known their movements. Someone had known where they were going, when. It wasn't just a general awareness. It was precise. Too precise for Thorne to have simply guessed. She went back over the routes, the timings. Both times they had taken a vehicle. Both times their destination had been known before they arrived. She looked at the encrypted tablets, at the burner phones. Had she been compromised there? Lena assured her the lines were secure, untraceable. But what about the transportation itself? What about the vehicle? A cold suspicion began to form, a slow, creeping dread that tightened her chest. She remembered the cabbie, the impassive driver who had been at the wheel for every critical journey, from that first terrifying ride after the hit, to their hurried escape from the safe house, to her reckless, independent trip to Maria's apartment. He was always there, always silent, always present. He was the one constant, the neutral party. Carmen pulled up a map of the city, tracing the routes with her finger. Every time, a cab. Not always the same one, but a cab from the same independent fleet Patrick sometimes used for discreet movements. She remembered Lena's reports about data brokers. What if it wasn't a network of surveillance from Thorne, but a simpler, more insidious leak? A data leak. Someone selling information about rides. Her fingers flew across the keyboard of the encrypted tablet, cross-referencing information. She started looking for patterns in the independent taxi services, for any anomalies in their dispatch logs, for any reports of drivers selling route intelligence. It was a long shot, a desperate hunch, but it felt right, a cold, undeniable certainty growing within her. This wasn't about tapping phones or bugging rooms. It was about something far more mundane, far more insidious, the monetization of everyday movements. And her source. She hadn't forgotten them. She fed their name, their last known location, into Lena's network, using the same parameters she was now applying to the leak. If the cabbie was selling ride data, perhaps he had sold information about her source's movements too. The thought sent a fresh wave of ice through her veins. This wasn't just a broader network of surveillance, it was a deeper, more personal betrayal. She looked up, her eyes meeting Patrick's across the dimly lit kitchen. He was watching her, his expression unreadable, but she felt a silent question in his gaze. She didn't have a name yet, not a definitive one, but she had a theory, and it was chilling. The leak wasn't just a problem. It was a person who had been right there in the car with them. The narrow confines of the row home, once a temporary sanctuary, now felt like a pressure cooker. Carmen Lewis, still raw from her close call, pushed a half-empty coffee mug aside, her frustration a bitter taste on her tongue. Maps of the riverfront, sparse records from the inspector's ransacked house, and notes from Maria's terrified whisper lay scattered across the kitchen table. "It doesn't make sense," Carmen muttered, tracing a line on the Philadelphia map. Her gaze darted to Patrick Sullivan, who watched her from the doorway, his presence a silent, intense weight. How could they have known we were going to the inspector's? How did Rossi get to Maria's so fast? Patrick stepped into the small kitchen, his forearms resting on the table, his presence suddenly dominating the space. "They're not psychic, Ms. Lewis. Someone is talking." "But who?" Carmen clenched her jaw. "Your men are loyal," you said. Thorne's network wouldn't have known our movements inside your safe house or about my solo attempt to contact Maria. Her eyes swept the room, a flicker of suspicion. Unless there's a bug here, or in the other house. Patrick shook his head, his expression unyielding. My properties are swept clean daily, and my men have been thoroughly vetted. This isn't an inside job from my ranks, Carmen. The unexpected use of her first name, a rare break in his formality, sent a jolt through her, a strange mix of intimacy and alarm. And Thorne's reach is wide, but not that wide. Not into my most secure lines. There's another player. Carmen pushed back from the table, pacing the cramped kitchen. Okay, let's track it. Every movement, every communication. From the moment I got in that cab after the hit, to the safe house, to the inspectors, to Maria's. She pointed to a timeline she'd scrawled on a separate sheet. What's the one constant, the thing that connects all these points? They spent hours immersed in the meticulous review, a strange, intense partnership. Patrick, with his astonishing memory for faces and routes, provided the logistical details. Carmen, with her reporter's mind, sifted through for patterns, for the elusive link. He described the discrete vehicles, the secure comms, the few trusted contacts used for transport. The cars, Carmen murmured, a sudden realization dawning cold and sharp. Every time, from that first night to the safe house, to the inspectors, to when I went to Maria's, it was always a vehicle, and often it was from that independent fleet you sometimes use, wasn't it? Her eyes, wide with sudden insight, met his. The dispatch, the drivers. Patrick's expression tightened, a flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. He hadn't considered the most mundane, yet most pervasive form of data. They're independent operators, Ms. Lewis. They don't answer to me or to Thorne directly. They're just fixers, freelancers. Freelancers who operate on apps, who use digital dispatch systems, Carmen countered, her voice gaining speed, a frantic energy building. Freelancers whose movements are tracked, whose data can be sold, not just who they're driving, but where they're picking them up, where they're going, when. She pulled up an encrypted article Lena had sent her weeks ago about a nascent black market for rideshare data. A pattern of data sales, a shell company paying for route intelligence or logistical reports. It wouldn't look like a direct hit. It would look like a business transaction. She pointed to the timeline again, then to a specific entry, the cab that picked her up after the hit, the same cab that drove them to the safe house, the same cab that drove her to Maria's. The driver's face, impassive, a blank slate, flashed in her mind. He was the common denominator. A cold dread seeped into Carmen's bones. This wasn't some shadowy hacker. This was a person, someone they had trusted, or at least used, who was selling their movements for profit. The betrayal was insidious, hidden in plain sight. This unseen player, Carmen said, her voice barely a whisper, they're not part of Thorne's muscle. They're not one of your men. They're just a vendor. Selling information, including, I bet, information about my source's last known locations. Her eyes met Patrick's. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about Thorne's project anymore. It was about how information, even the most mundane, could be weaponized. Patrick's jaw was rigid, his gaze distant, processing the revelation. A leak, he finally rumbled, the word tasting bitter. Not a spy, a transaction. His eyes, when they met hers again, were filled with a dangerous, calculating intensity. This changes everything, Ms. Lewis. We need to flush out this player. They are the key to Thorne's operations and to finding your source. He picked up a secure phone. Lena, I need every piece of data on that independent cab fleet. Every driver, every dispatch, and cross-reference it with any known payments from Thorne's shell companies for logistical services. Start now. Carmen watched him, a strange mix of fear and exhilaration swirling within her. The threat had a face now, or at least a method. It was a new kind of enemy, modern and insidious, and it meant their plan, their reluctant alliance, was about to take an even more dangerous turn. The truth was there, hidden in the mundane, and they were about to drag it into the light. Lena's report landed on the kitchen table with a soft thud, an encrypted file on the tablet. Carmen's fingers trembled slightly as she tapped it open, her gaze fixed on the screen. Patrick stood beside her, his presence a silent, coiled tension. The air in the row-room felt impossibly heavy, charged with the weight of expectation and dread. The data scrolled past, a blur of names, dates, and locations. Carmen had been right. Lena's meticulous cross-referencing had uncovered a pattern of payments, small but consistent, from a shell company linked to Elias Thorne. The recipient? Not an individual, but an obscure, independent dispatch service that specialized in discreet rides. And within that dispatch service, one name surfaced again and again, linked to every compromised movement, every thwarted plan, every close call. Marcus Thorne, the cabbie. Marcus, the blank face, the impassive eyes, the quiet efficiency. The man who had driven her into this nightmare, the man she'd begged to drive, just as Patrick slid in beside her. He wasn't just a driver. He was a vendor, a seller of information. A cold, sick feeling gripped Carmen's stomach. It wasn't a spy network, not a grand conspiracy. It was something far more mundane, far more chilling. A man selling their location data, their movements, for a quick profit. The betrayal was casual, insidious, stripped of any ideological pretense. It was just business. Her eyes snapped up, meeting Patrick's. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. "Marcus," she whispered, the name tasting like ash. "The cabbie, he's the leak. He's been selling our movements every single time." Patrick didn't need the words. His gaze was already locked on the screen, his face a mask of stone, but the muscles in his jaw worked, betraying the storm brewing beneath. He read the details, the small regular payments, the specific dates matching their compromised routes. He saw the cold, undeniable proof. "He sold me," Carmen said, her voice rising, a surge of raw anger pushing past the initial shock. "He sold my source. He knew where we were going, where we were hiding. He put us directly in Rossi's path, not out of loyalty to Thorne, but for a few extra dollars." The casualness of it was almost worse than outright malice. It was a betrayal without passion, without conviction, just pure, unadulterated greed. Her trust, her life, her source's safety, all reduced to data points on a ledger. Patrick's hand slammed down on the table, a sudden, explosive sound that made Carmen jump. The tablet skittered. His eyes, usually controlled, blazed with a fury she hadn't seen before. It wasn't the cold, calculating anger of a strategic mind. It was something deeper, more primal. "A fixer," he snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "A neutral party, profiting off the lives of innocent people, and a whistleblower." The word whistleblower hung in the air, a stark reminder of his own twisted code. He protected them. This man, this Marcus, had actively jeopardized one for profit. It wasn't just a breach of security, it was a profound violation of his own dark principles. "He sold the location of your source," Patrick said, his voice laced with venom, his gaze fixed on the screen as if Marcus Thorne's face was staring back. "That hit you saw? The one that broke my code? He facilitated it. He made it easier for Thorne and Rossi to find them, to silence them." Carmen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. This wasn't just about their alliance anymore. This was personal for Patrick. This rogue element, this mercenary of information, had crossed a line that, for all his brutal methods, Patrick Sullivan held sacred. "This changes everything," Carmen said, her voice steady, her own anger now a cold, hard resolve. "He didn't just leak our whereabouts. He led Thorne directly to my source. He's a direct accomplice. Patrick nodded slowly, his fury now channeled, sharpened into a dangerous focus. He looked at Carmen, his eyes dark with a grim determination. He's not just a leak, Miss Lewis. He's Thorne's eyes and ears. He's the reason your source disappeared. And he's the reason we've been running in circles. He picked up the secure phone, his grip tight. "Lena!" He barked into the receiver, his voice like steel. "I need everything on Marcus Thorne. Every contact, every movement, every transaction. And I need a way to get a message to him, a very specific message, one that will bring Thorne and Rossi straight to us." Carmen watched him, a strange, unsettling clarity settling over her. The betrayal was infuriating, but it had also given them a target, a direct link to Thorne, a lever they could use. The alliance, once reluctant, now felt forged in the heat of this shared outrage. They were no longer just two people forced together by circumstance. They were united against a common, insidious enemy, and now they knew exactly who that enemy was. The game had just become very, very personal. The Rohum vibrated with a dangerous energy, a stark contrast to the quiet dread that had settled after the cabbie's betrayal. Carmen Lewis slammed Lena's tablet shut, the image of Marcus Thorne's name still burning behind her eyes. He wasn't just a leak, he was their unwilling weapon. "So," Carmen began, her voice sharp, cutting through the silence. She looked at Patrick, whose face was still set in a grim mask, his fury barely contained. "We use him. We feed him something juicy, something he can sell to Thorne, something that will bring them out into the open." Patrick nodded slowly, his eyes, usually so guarded, now burning with a cold fire. "A bait. A lure. What kind of bait?" Carmen paced the cramped kitchen, her mind racing. "Thorne wants my source silenced. He wants the evidence they had. We can make him think he's about to get both. A fake drop. A dead man's switch of information, if you will. Something Marcus would jump at. Something he can sell to Thorne as the ultimate prize." "And Thorne will send Rossi," Patrick finished, a dark edge to his voice. "He'll want to secure it himself. Eliminate the threat." "Exactly," Carmen confirmed, a shiver of dread and exhilaration running through her. "But this time, they won't be meeting a vulnerable source. They'll be meeting us, and the world." She pulled her wired mic from her bag, holding it up, her fingers tightening around the cool metal. "This is our weapon, Patrick. Not bullets, not fists, truth." Patrick watched her, his gaze intense, assessing. "A live broadcast," he murmured, the words sounding foreign on his tongue. He was a man of action, of decisive, often violent force. This was a different kind of war. "My men will be in position, but you made your terms clear, Ms. Lewis. No violence, not from you, and not from my men, unless absolutely necessary for self-defense." Carmen met his gaze, unwavering. This was the moment of truth, the ultimate test of their fragile alliance. Could she trust him? Could he truly adhere to her code, even when his instincts screamed for a different kind of justice? "My terms stand," she said, her voice firm. "This exposes Thorne. It doesn't start a war. If your men engage, if there's a bloodbath, my broadcast means nothing. It just makes us look like another faction fighting in the shadows." He held her eyes, a silent battle raging in his own. She saw the conflict there, the ingrained habits of a lifetime warring with this new, dangerous strategy. His jaw tightened. "My word, Miss Lewis," he finally said, his voice low and steady, a dangerous promise. "My men will stand down. No violence unless it's their lives on the line. You will get your clean story, but you have to deliver, Carmen. You have to make that broadcast count." The use of her first name, unbidden, felt like a silent pact, a recognition of the immense trust he was placing in her. Carmen felt a knot of fear and gratitude twist in her stomach. He was trusting her with his people, with his leverage. and she was trusting him with her life and her integrity. "I will," she vowed, her grip on the mic tightening. "I'll make sure they confess themselves. Live." Over the next few hours, the plan solidified. They concocted a plausible story. Carmen's source, in a desperate move, had managed to copy the damning files onto a burner phone, then gone into hiding, leaving instructions for Marcus to pick up the phone at a specific, isolated location, a location Marcus would then sell to Thorne. The bait was irresistible, the complete silencing of the source and the irrefutable evidence. Carmen spent meticulous minutes checking her mic, her recorder, the secure connection to her podcast platform. She planned every detail of her reveal, how she would activate the broadcast, how she would confront Thorne, forcing his hand, making him confess under the glaring, undeniable light of a live audience. This was her arena, her battlefield. Patrick, meanwhile, moved with a quiet efficiency, giving orders, positioning his men. He explained the chosen location, an abandoned warehouse district near the waterfront, a place where sounds carried, where shadows were long, and where a live broadcast could cut through the isolation and reverberate across the city. As night fell, a heavy, expectant silence descended upon the row home. The trap was set. Marcus, unaware he was a pawn, was already on his way, believing he was about to make a fortune. Thorne and Rossi, arrogant in their power, would follow. Carmen looked at Patrick, standing by the window, his silhouette stark against the fading light. He turned, his eyes meeting hers across the room. There was no romance in the gaze, not yet, only a shared, potent understanding. They were two enemies, bound by a dangerous necessity, on the precipice of a gamble that would either expose the truth or cost them everything. Her hand instinctively went to her mic, her heart thrumming with a terrifying, exhilarating purpose. The game was on. The tunnel under I-95 was a gaping maw of concrete and shadow, a desolate, echoing space that swallowed sound and light. The air was thick with the damp chill of the earth, carrying the faint, metallic tang of exhaust fumes. Carmen Lewis shivered, pulling her jacket tighter, but it wasn't just the cold that made her skin prickle. It was the crushing weight of the moment, the terrifying precipice they stood on. This was it. The chosen battlefield. Her fingers, steady despite the tremor in her stomach, meticulously checked the wired mic. It was taped securely to her inner wrist, running up her sleeve, discreetly connected to the tiny, encrypted transmitter hidden in her pocket. The podcast feed was ready, a silent digital current waiting for her command. She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. Every breath felt shallow, every sound amplified in the oppressive quiet. Patrick stood a few feet away, a dark, imposing silhouette against the faint glow filtering in from the tunnel's entrance. He was talking to his men, his voice a low, gravelly murmur that somehow carried through the vast space. Carmen couldn't hear the exact words, but she knew the message. She'd made him repeat his orders countless times. No violence. Stand down unless absolutely necessary. Her rules. She watched him, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. He was putting everything on the line for her method, for her impossible demand of a bloodless truth. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the rigid set of his jaw. He was a man of action, of swift, brutal resolution. Waiting for him must have been agony, but he was doing it. He was honoring their pact. The thought sent a strange jolt through her, a mix of profound trust and terrifying responsibility. She had to make this count. For him, for her source, for the city. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, picturing Thorne's face, Rossi's menacing sneer. They were coming, arrogant in their power, believing they were walking into a clean sweep, an easy transaction. Believing Marcus, the cabbie, was their loyal informant. Marcus, the unwitting pawn. He was already on his way, convinced he was about to collect a hefty sum for delivering Thorne the ultimate prize, Carmen's source's final proof. The betrayal was so simple, so effective, so utterly devastating, and he had no idea he was leading himself and his buyers into a trap. A faint flicker of light appeared at the far end of the tunnel, growing steadily brighter. Headlights. Her breath hitched. They were early, or Marcus was. Carmen's adrenaline surged, sharp and cold. Her mind snapped into hyperfocus. Her gaze swept the tunnel, identifying the precise spot where she would emerge, where her voice would carry, where the light would hit Thorne's face. She felt the weight of the mic, the fragile power it held. This wasn't just about her story anymore. It was about justice, delivered in real time, undeniable and unspinnable. Patrick turned, his eyes meeting hers across the gloom. There was no need for words. The silent message passed between them was clear. It's time. His men, shadows against the concrete walls, shifted subtly. Their presence felt more than seen. They were poised, ready, but under strict orders. Carmen knew what they were capable of, what Patrick was capable of. But tonight, it would be her words, her truth, that would strike the blow. The rumble of an approaching engine grew louder, echoing off the tunnel walls, vibrating through the ground. Carmen took a deep, steadying breath, pushing down the fear, letting the fierce resolve take over. Her thumb hovered over the transmit button on her hidden device. The broadcast was seconds away. The city was about to listen. The game, the real game, was about to begin. The rumble of the approaching engine grew louder, echoing off the tunnel walls, vibrating through the ground. Carmen's breath hitched. Headlights, blinding and stark, cut through the gloom, growing larger with terrifying speed. A black SUV, sleek and menacing, screeched to a halt in the cavernous space. Behind it, a familiar yellow cab. Marcus. The SUV's doors swung open. Elias Thorne emerged first, his expensive suit a dark silhouette against the headlights, an arrogant smirk on his face. Marco Rossi, Thorne's enforcer, followed, his eyes scanning the shadows, a dangerous readiness in his posture. Marcus, the cabbie, stepped out of his vehicle, his face still impassive, though Carmen imagined a flicker of anticipation in his eyes for the money he thought he was about to collect. They believed they were in control, walking into a silent exchange, a final victory. Patrick stepped out from the deeper shadows, his presence suddenly dominating the tunnel, calm and utterly formidable. He stopped a few feet from Thorne, his voice, when it came, a low rumble that filled the echoing space without needing to be loud. "Thorne, Rossi, so glad you could make it." Thorne's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "Sullivan! What is this? I was told there was a proposition." "There is," Patrick countered, his gaze sweeping over Thorne, then Rossi, and finally settling on Marcus, who shifted uneasily. "A proposition to clean up your mess. The one involving my code, the one involving a dead man on a rainy street, the one involving a reporter and her source." Thorne scoffed, a nervous edge to his bravado. "I don't know what you're talking about, and I certainly don't involve myself with your petty disputes." "Oh, you do," Patrick said, his voice hardening, his eyes like steel. He gestured towards Marcus. "You involve yourself with backroom deals. You pay for information. Information about who's moving where, who's talking to whom. Information from a certain independent fixer who thought selling ride data was a harmless side hustle." Marcus froze. His head snapped up, his impassive facade cracking, revealing a raw, dawning terror. He looked from Patrick to Thorne, then back to Patrick, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He finally understood. He had been played. He was not a valuable asset. He was a betrayed pawn. Carmen's heart hammered. This was it, her moment. She stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, the hidden speakers Patrick's men had subtly placed throughout the tunnel suddenly crackling to life. Her voice, amplified and chillingly clear, rang out, cutting through the heavy silence, bouncing off the walls, a stark, undeniable presence. "Hello, Mr. Thorne." Thanks for joining our live broadcast. Thorne's head snapped towards her, his face draining of color. Rossi tensed, his hand instinctively going to his jacket. Marcus stumbled back, his eyes wide with horror, a strangled sound escaping his throat. "That's right, Mr. Thorne," Carmen continued, her voice steady, powerful, despite the wild thrumming of her pulse. "This isn't a private meeting. This is a public expose. I'm Carmen Lewis, and you're currently live on Philly's Underbelly. The entire city is listening." She held up her mic, clearly visible now. "We have recordings, Mr. Thorne. Recordings of your enforcer, Marco Rossi, intimidating property owners. We have Lena's meticulous tracking of your shell corporations and the money laundering scheme you've been running through them to fund your riverfront development. And thanks to Marcus here," she glanced briefly at the trembling cabbie, "we know you paid him to track my source, the whistleblower who had all the evidence against you and led Rossi right to them that rainy night. The hit on that corner, that was your doing, wasn't it? To silence them, to silence anyone who dared to speak the truth." Thorne's face was a mask of furious disbelief, then pure, unadulterated panic. He looked wildly around the tunnel, as if expecting to find a camera crew, a hidden audience. "This is insane. A setup. I don't know what she's talking about. Rossi, deal with this." Rossi lunged, not for Carmen, but for Patrick. A desperate, animalistic charge. He pulled a knife, its blade glinting wickedly in the dim light. "Stand down!" Patrick roared, his voice cutting through the tunnel, echoing with absolute authority. His men, who had been moving to intercept Rossi, froze, their movements checked by his command. They held their positions, weapons holstered, a testament to their loyalty and his control. Carmen's breath caught. He was honoring her rules. Even now, Thorne, desperate and cornered, his eyes darting between Carmen's mic and Patrick's unwavering gaze, sputtered. "It wasn't. It was a mistake. Rossi went too far. He was out of control. I just wanted the property, the permits. He laundered the money, not me, I swear." The words tumbled out, a panicked, damning confession, live and unedited, for all of Philadelphia to hear. Rossi, momentarily disoriented by Patrick's command to his men, still lunged, but without the full force of Patrick's organized backup, he was less effective. Two of Patrick's men, moving with practiced precision, quickly subdued him, pinning him to the ground without a single punch or kick, just swift, controlled movements. The knife clattered harmlessly to the concrete. Thorne stared, his confession hanging in the air, undeniable. He had just condemned himself, live on the air. His empire, built on shadows and intimidation, was crumbling under the glare of Carmen Lewis's microphone. Carmen met Patrick's eyes, a surge of adrenaline, relief, and something dangerously close to triumph coursing through her. They had done it. They had won, and they had done it on her terms. The tunnel, moments before an echo chamber of desperation and confession, was now filled with the frantic chatter of Patrick's men, the low thrum of their radios, and the distant wail of sirens growing closer. Elias Thorne, his face ashen, stood trembling, his desperate confession hanging in the damp air like a death knell. Marco Rossi, subdued but still snarling, was being held by two of Patrick's men, his knife lying forgotten on the concrete. Marcus, the cabbie, slumped against the yellow cab, utterly broken, his betrayal laid bare. Carmen stood amidst it all, her mic still active, the broadcast continuing, capturing the sounds of justice unfolding. Her heart pounded, a triumphant drum against her ribs. She felt a dizzying mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had done it. She had exposed them. Live. News crews, alerted by the sudden viral explosion of Philly's Underbelly on every social media feed, were already swarming the tunnel's entrance, their lights turning the desolate space into a chaotic stage. Thorne and Rossi were quickly handed over to the arriving police, their faces grim, their power shattered. Marcus, the cabbie, was taken into custody, his story a testament to the insidious nature of modern corruption. Later, as the first rays of dawn painted the Philadelphia skyline in bruised purples and greys, Carmen received the call she'd been praying for. Her source, found, safe. Lena's network, using Marcus's own sole data, had pinpointed their last known secure location. The relief that flooded Carmen was so profound it almost buckled her knees. Her source was alive. Their testimony was now protected, vital, and would bring down Thorne's network for good. The central conflict, the driving force of her terrifying alliance, was finally resolved. Back at the row home, the quiet felt deafening after the tunnel's chaos. Carmen sat at the kitchen table, the empty coffee mug a familiar comfort. Her hands still trembled slightly, but her mind was clear, resolute. She had walked through fire, made a pact with the devil, and emerged with the truth. She acknowledged the danger of Patrick's world, the constant threat that hummed beneath the city's surface, but she also acknowledged his code, his surprising adherence to his word, his grudging respect for her integrity. He could have let his men loose in that tunnel. He could have taken the easy, violent path, but he hadn't. He had trusted her, and she had delivered. A knock on the open kitchen doorway. Patrick stood there, shedding his dark jacket, his tie loosened. He looked tired, but his eyes held a familiar, intense glint. "It's done," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Thorne's network is unraveling. Rossi is facing multiple charges. Marcus is singing like a canary. Your source is secured. And your broadcast, it's everywhere. You broke them, Carmen. Without a single shot fired." Carmen met his gaze, a strange mix of emotions swirling within her, a shared victory, dangerous and profound. "We broke them," she corrected, her voice soft but firm. "Together." She paused, then took a deep breath. This was the moment, the choice. "But this alliance, Patrick, it ends now." His expression remained unreadable, but a flicker of something, disappointment perhaps, or understanding, crossed his eyes. "I expected as much," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, yet still holding that powerful undercurrent. "You're not one to be contained, Miss Lewis. Not in my world. Not in anyone's." "No," Carmen affirmed, her chin lifting. "My work isn't done, but I have to do it my way, on my terms, without the shadows. I've seen your world, Patrick. The danger, the brutality, the constant compromises. I can't live in it." She looked at him, truly looked at him, acknowledging the man who had been her captor, her protector, her unlikely ally. "You kept your word. You honored my rules. And I won't forget that." A silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words, with the weight of what they had shared, what they had risked. The air crackled with a strange, undeniable tension. He was a force of nature, dangerous and compelling, and she had felt its pull. But she was Carmen Lewis, a journalist, and her allegiance was to the truth, to the light. Patrick took a step closer, then stopped, respecting the invisible boundary she had drawn. "And your story?" he asked, his voice low, almost a challenge. "The one about me? Will you still tell it, Ms. Lewis?" Carmen met his gaze, unwavering. "Every word, unfiltered, uncensored, just as I promised." A ghost of a smile touched her lips, but perhaps with a new understanding of the city's complex loyalties and a deeper appreciation for certain codes. He nodded slowly, a faint, almost imperceptible curve playing on his lips, a dark amusement returning to his eyes. "Then I suppose I'll be listening." He turned to leave, his presence already fading from the small kitchen, from her immediate world. "Patrick," she called out, a sudden, unbidden impulse. He stopped, turning back, his gaze questioning. Carmen hesitated, then shook her head, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "Nothing, just Goodbye." He looked at her for a long moment, a silent message passing between them, a complex web of respect, danger, and an undeniable, unresolved connection. Then, with a final, almost imperceptible nod, he walked out, leaving Carmen alone in the quiet kitchen. The city outside was waking up, vibrant and dangerous, ready for her story. She had her truth, she had her agency, and she knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that her journey was far from over. Months later, the grand ballroom of the Bellevue Hotel shimmered under 1,000 lights, thick with the scent of success. Carmen Lewis, her heart pounding with a different kind of adrenaline, walked onto the stage. The applause was a roaring wave, an overwhelming tide of recognition. Philly's underbelly, the Thorne Exposé, had won the prestigious Benjamin Franklin Journalism Award. She gripped the heavy statuette, its cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth spreading through her chest. This was it. The validation, the truth finally, out in the open. She approached the podium, the bright lights momentarily blinding. "Thank you," she began, her voice clear and strong, resonating with a new, hard-won confidence. "This award isn't just for me. It's for every truth-teller, every whistleblower who risks everything to shine a light into the darkest corners." She spoke of courage, of accountability, of the relentless pursuit of justice in a city that often tried to bury its secrets. She spoke of the complex loyalties, the shadows, the unexpected alliances forged when the public good was at stake. She didn't name Patrick Sullivan, couldn't. But every word, every carefully chosen phrase about unconventional paths and necessary evils was an implicit acknowledgement of the dangerous, compelling man who had stood with her in that tunnel. Her editor beamed from the crowd. Her source, safe and living under a new identity, had sent a quiet, anonymous message of congratulations. It was enough. It was everything. The high of the ceremony faded with the city lights. Later that night, the Ben Franklin Bridge hummed with the steady flow of traffic, a ribbon of light stretching across the dark Delaware. Carmen stood by the railing, the wind whipping her hair, the award statuette long since put away. A shadow fell beside her. Patrick. He didn't speak, just leaned against the railing, his gaze fixed on the shimmering water below. No grand entrance, no romantic flourish, just his silent, powerful presence. "Congratulations, Miss Lewis," he said, his voice a low rumble blending with the sounds of the bridge. "You earned it." She turned to him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I told you I'd deliver." "You always do," he replied, a hint of something unreadable in his eyes. "And you kept your word about my part, mostly." "I told the whole truth," Carmen countered, a slight edge in her voice, a reminder of their rules. "Even the parts about you. The public now knows of a certain code that operates beneath the surface." He merely nodded. "Some truths are more palatable than others." He reached into his coat, not for a weapon, but for a small, crumpled paper bag. He held it out. Soft pretzel, still warm. Carmen took it, a surprised laugh escaping her. A soft pretzel, so mundane, so perfectly them. "Thank you," she said, tearing off a piece, the salty dough a familiar comfort. "I heard about the community center in Fishtown, the one Thorne tried to bulldoze." Patrick looked out at the water, his profile etched against the city glow. "Some things need protection. Some people need a leg up." It was anonymous. "You don't have to report on it." "I won't," she promised, a warmth spreading through her, not just from the pretzel. She understood. His redemption wasn't for public consumption, but a quiet, necessary act in his own dark world. They stood in comfortable silence, sharing the pretzel, the city lights reflecting in their eyes. Their connection was a strange tapestry woven from danger, distrust, and a profound, reluctant respect. There were no declarations of love, no promises of a future in sunlight. Their romance was a clandestine meeting on a bridge, a shared soft pretzel, a quiet understanding forged in the crucible of Philadelphia's underbelly. It was guarded, rule-heavy, constantly tested by the stark realities of their separate lives. He turned to her, his dark eyes intense. "You're still looking for the next story, aren't you?" "Always," she confirmed, a fierce glint in her own eyes. "And you're still maintaining your balance?" "Someone has to," he said, a faint, dangerous smile touching his lips. "It's a delicate city, Carmen, and some shadows will always remain." Carmen looked at him, then back at the sprawling, vibrant city. It was true. The shadows would always be there. But now she knew how to navigate them, and sometimes in the darkest corners, an unlikely ally could help you find the light. Their story wasn't a fairy tale, but a testament to a truth found in the most unexpected places, a connection that defied logic, and a city that never truly slept. If you enjoyed the video, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to keep up with our content.